Hey, everybody. I am Megan, and I am here to have another lively conversation with my special guest. Special guest, will you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Jenny Alexander Allen, and I'm currently a seminary student at ULS in Gettysburg. And gosh, I don't know. Um, I am someone who identifies as a non-binary trans woman. So I use both she and they pronouns. Usually she, but you just have some days where you feel more they.
I get that feeling as well. For those who might not have heard of you before, you have recently been in the newspapers. Would you be willing to share with people your summary about why you've been in the newspapers and what that's been like?
Yeah. So, like we were discussing earlier, the the concept of being in the newspapers when you're from the Midwest is not is not necessarily a positive thing. It means you've drawn attention to yourself, and there is an odd intersection between that Midwestern value of being small and unnoticed, and also being trans and at times wanting to be small and unnoticed. So it comes as a bit of a surprise when people from different news media say that they want to talk to me. Um, but I understand the reason for asking to talk to me because of what I've gone through has resulted in some really big changes in PG County in the school system that I work for, which I had raised concerns about trans inclusion all the way back in 2011. Uh, and we have just recently reached a settlement that was mutually satisfactory for everyone involved, that brought those protections to the forefront for transgender faculty and staff members and students. And I just have to say, having the opportunity to review these policies and to help revise them and strengthen them, I honestly believe that these are some of the most rigorous trans protective policies that school districts have right now and would serve as a good model for other districts that are looking at maybe adding trans inclusive policies, or other advocates who are looking for a model of how to put these things together. Um, if if you go and check out the Prince George's policies that they're putting in place now, you're going to see protections for not just how a person chooses to be referred to, but protections for their existence in public spaces, protections from bullying and harassment, protections from being outed um, without their consent in the process. So it really creates a more inclusive and healthy environment, not just for trans people, not just for LGBTQIA plus people, but for everyone. When you protect the most marginalized, you're also protecting everyone else.
What and not everybody knows this, particularly kind of non-trans people who are out in the world, but far too often, in order to get protections and civil rights, folk who are trans and gender nonconforming sometimes gain access to different jobs or to protections for jobs through the legal system or through laws being created, um, much more often than having it happen organically. Knowing that this is a thing that sometimes trans folk could go to, and having a number of people who watch this to sort of kind of learn the wisdom of other people who have trod journeys like this, I'm curious, legal settlements or trying to get you don't get you don't get made unharmed through the legal process. What you get is things that maybe are reparative to try to prevent harms into the future. And it can be a very long journey. Things like this often take multiple years, 2 to 3 to 5 years, to even get to a place where there would be a settlement. How did you care for yourself in the midst of all of that? And you don't have to share everything you did, but just the stuff you'd want to share online with other people who might go through similar stuff. What's some of the ways that you cared for yourself?
Oh, wow. The process of learning to care for yourself is such a long and difficult one. And in fact, I just recently was rereading in First Kings that passage where Elijah is ready to quit and just give up. And he he goes and has a little pout under the tree. And the angel comes and wakes him up and says, "Hey, listen, drink some water, eat some bread," essentially telling him, "Here, have a Snickers, you're not yourself right now, and rest and restore your energy." And learning to do that is the hardest part of, I think, living as a minoritized person in an environment that is not healthy for you all the time or not supportive of you all the time. So the the way I have gone about it involves a lot of intentionality, reminding myself that it's okay to take care of myself. I think a lot of us feel like we have to constantly be active. We have to constantly be talking about and shouting down harmful policies or laws that are being passed, or protecting other marginalized communities, the intersections between the trans community and the Black community, the communities of color, communities of disabled people, women, other minoritized communities, and the intersections we have. There's a lot of demand on us. And it's hard to acknowledge that it's okay to take a break, to recognize that someone else will step up and step in when you need to step back and recharge.
Yeah, that's especially a difficult thing to do if you come from a space that really prioritizes working to exhaustion. I don't know which parts of Minnesota you hail from, but growing up in South Dakota, this idea that you work from before the sun comes up until long past the sun goes down, because working hard is a part of your faith life or a part of your being an ethical person in the world, can make it really hard to feel like caring for yourself is a part of like being a responsible and happy adult. It I don't know, did you have any sort of like, as you were, any cultures that inspired you to like overdo?
Oh, yes. I grew up in northern Minnesota in an absolutely tiny little farming town. And my family was really good at setting an example of hard work, perfectionism, and toughing it out. And there is a certain value within that when you live in an area of the country where the environment can be a bit hostile to your existence at times. If you look at the winters in the Midwest, they're not the most pleasant all the time, and so hard work was a way of keeping yourself and your family and your community, protected, secured. That you had food, that you could get out of your house to go to the store or go to church. So there is some value in that. At the same time, I also saw examples from people, my father, my grandfather, who they would get injured and they would just keep working. And there's a really unhealthy element to that. And I brought that into my work as a teacher when I first started teaching. Work to exhaustion, work to oh, I need to pause this for a second. Cat just came in with a bird in its mouth. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, that's noble reason for pausing. That was
Oh,
perhaps the most Midwestern work ethic thing that could happen right there, to have a bird want to show you its fierce cat prowess.
yes, that's right. No, and of course my biologist wife is like, well, this is not a native species, so I don't feel bad. It's an invasive species of bird. I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
I'm gonna feel bad, but that's okay. You do you.
it's a very queer response to the whole situation. I very much appreciate it. Yeah. Well, there you go. I think you were talking about how when people don't take care of themselves, they injure themselves. Um, but I think the bird had a much faster like parable about the whole thing, right? Like,
Yes, yes. No, and I saw the other day you were also posting about birds, and so there seems to be a theme going on here.
yes,
Um,
that's right. And I was impressed by your knowledge of very fancy academic words for predicting things based on birds.
oh, yes, yes. Well, yeah, I think it's because I am currently in a church history class. We are talking about the Romans using the ornithom. See, I can write it, but I can't say it. using birds as symbols and omens, and so
Well, it explains a lot about why that the dove had to fly down and be a part of Jesus's coming into this world, perhaps, right?
yes, absolutely. There is a language in the Gospels that's very anti-Rome,
Hmm.
and the way the Gospels take the symbols of Rome and flip them upside down,
Yep.
whether it's the bird descending on Jesus or coming in on a donkey on the through the opposite gate of Caesar.
Yeah. Murdering all
Jesus
of
is
those
Lord, not
pigs.
Caesar.
Yeah, the army symbol was the boar, and then they put the sins of Legion's demons into all of those pigs and drown them in the lake.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I was I just recently heard Queer Theology did a podcast, several on the Book of Mark, and they took some
Mm,
time talking about how the pigs were representative of the Roman legion.
yeah. Yeah. Well, that sort of takes us towards a space of like, how does one get from working in a school to seminary, right?
Oh,
Especially in times like this when the world doesn't often, as its first idea, put a trans person on the cover of the seminary brochure.
no, no, they tend not to. Uh, so, um, in truth, the story is actually the other way around. I started off uh, at Augustana in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and my intention was to become a minister. I was in the religion program. I was pre-seminary, and I had, and I won't say the name of the church because the pastor who was there is no longer there, and the people who were perhaps the more troublesome are also no longer there. So we won't say the name of the church, but my internship, my senior year, was at a ELCA church where uh, the attitude was very much hate sin and hate people who sin until they learn not to sin, which isn't my personal philosophy, and I don't find it a very helpful philosophy. But I recall my first um my first day on that internship. They brought me into a little conference room and they set down a uh, electric pencil sharpener and another electric pencil sharpener. And they began talking about how Augustana was a bit too liberal and a bit too open and supportive. And they showed me how the plugs of the electric pencil sharpeners don't go together, and then plug them into the wall as a demonstration of compatibility and God's desire for our physical compatibility with one another. Uh, yeah, they gave me a lot of very strict rules and regulations about what I could wear and what my voice could sound like, and uh, the limits of compassion and grace. And so I did what I needed to do to get my internship grade. I showed up, I had a nice tie on every Sunday. I dropped my voice as low as I could make it, and did my best to present as a good Lutheran clergy boy. And after a semester of that, I walked into my advisor's office, said, I've completed my assignment, I've gotten a good grade, and I am turning down my offer to attend seminary at Gettysburg, and I cannot be part of a church that doesn't want me as me. And probably the last thing my advisor and I said on the subject at the time was, he asked the question, if we don't have people in the church who are approaching it from your perspective, then who does that leave in the church to be a model or a representative for other people? And that's a good question, and it's not a good question. Because on the one hand, you have to take care of yourself, like we're talking about. You have to be able to protect yourself. And sometimes protecting yourself means leaving. Sometimes love means loving from a distance.
Yeah, because they wanted you to be the pencil in the other side of the pencil sharpener.
That's right.
And they wanted to chop away all of the bits of you they didn't like, but it meant really like wearing you down into a nub. Oof.
That's right.
Oof.
Yeah. So the words, although maybe not the best stated, did stay with me though. And I went on to get a degree in creative writing and to work in school systems and then eventually to become a teacher. And I kept thinking about that question of, if you leave, then who is left to communicate the ideas that people are going to go home with? And I tried to let that shape part of who I was as a teacher, to allow that to help me stand up for LGBTQ students within the school system that I was working with, to serve as sponsor for the Gay Straight Alliance that we had, to be a voice in administrative meetings for youth who were being shunted to the side. And that movement, that connection to community, drew back out from me the desire to also be working within the church in that regard. So when I left teaching, I began exploring the idea of going back into ministry in one form or another. Um, we were attending my wife's United Methodist Church at the time, And we had two very good pastors, very accepting and loving, kind people who I am absolutely grateful for on the regular. But as they moved to new callings and the church began pushing its question about whether it's appropriate to affirm LGBTQ people, whether it's appropriate to welcome LGBTQ people as they are, we realized that we didn't want to repeat the situation that I had been in when I was a teacher. That there's a limit to how much you can stay and fight in a situation where you also need to be fed. So we returned to the Lutheran Church and conversations with our pastors who routinely said things like, you think a little more about theology than the average person. Your heart for discussing big issues is a bit wider than the average person. Have you considered going back uh, to ministry? And I made a promise and I said, you get me in for free, I'll go.
Those are
And
famous last words, though.
yeah, they are.
When
They are
when you're like,
famous
God,
last
I'm
words.
not going. I'm going to pout under
Mhm.
this tree until, and then God's always like, well, fine. Then now you got
Yeah,
to go.
yeah, no, and the Gettysburg United Lutheran Seminary in Gettysburg has very generous donors and donors who were not afraid to give that scholarship to a transgender person. So, you say something, you got to make sure you live up to it.
Well, I also was a student in Augustana, in South Dakota, and I still have a number of pesky questions that the faculty there left in my head while I was at school as well. And so I get how those lingering questions tend to kind of continue to shape your growing as you go out into
Yeah.
the world for a very, very long time. And such a it's really is a place where I learned a lot of my resiliency because it was kind of in a state that wasn't quite ready for trans folk or queer folk, when I was a student there, but also
Absolutely.
like reminds you that a select group of great people really can feed you for the journey that you're about to set off on. So it's a fun.
Yes. And uh, although I spoke without much, although when I talked about the church that I served in, I pointed out the things that were very difficult. Within Augustana itself, I found amazingly supportive people, both the faculty within the religion department and our campus chaplains and other students who were able to open and express themselves in ways that the broader society of that time was not. I think it was my second year of college that Matthew Shepard was murdered. And being in the Midwest, being a queer person who was kind of visibly queer, uh, that was a scary time. And I remember having like Fritz Rush stop me and just ask, how are you handling this? How are you doing right now? Or Richard Swanson, Murray Har, Bartel giving me um, a little extra time to get something done because even though we didn't talk about it, they recognized that there were big things happening and that part of being Christian in the world is also having to interact with and engage with those big things.
Yeah. Are there sacred texts or scripture texts that are capturing your interest these days? I know you have to read some for school, but are there some that are sort of like living in your heart that help you with your resilience?
I come back a lot to, and it's not even my favorite gospel, but I come back to John and I come back to that promise of peace that exceeds what the world can give you. And learning to claim that peace is, I think, what I'm focused on more than anything else right now with interviews and classes and projects, and also just wanting to be uh, someone who is open and supportive at the church I serve. There's so much happening, and it's so easy to have anxiety and fear around not getting it done, not being good enough, being a bad representative for the church, for the queer community, for trans people. And I got to keep reminding myself that the promise is that we would have peace, that we would have life, and we would have life abundantly, and that these things go together.
Sorry, you touched me, and then I forgot I was supposed to also be a part of the conversation. I think you're right. I think there is a lot of like chaos sort of swirling in the world, and all of those the spaces where Jesus is trying to like help people take a breath, right? The moment I love the moment when Jesus comes back into the room where everyone's like afraid because he has died, and they're thinking about like trying to touch him, but his big thing, like the strange thing in the scripture is that it says that he breathed on them,
Yeah.
which just it reminds me of like just taking a beat, right? Like to just take a breath during a hard, weird, everyone in the room is freaking out, right? And to have the ability to just sort of like take a breath, um, and send that breath of life to the disciples. That for me is a thing I could kind of like ponder for a very long time and still not feel like it had a an answer. I like texts like that are spaces where I'm not going to be in a fight with Christians who are going to spend their whole life making sure anything I work for is undone. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And
Yeah.
so I just love when there are texts where it's like, yeah, but we all like this one. Like, let's talk about this one.
Yeah, no, and I recently was talking with some other queer folks of faith about, I mean, we could talk Bible verses that exclude all day. We could
Hmm.
argue the semantics, we
Hmm.
could break it down and talk about what the words mean and what the intention was. I find that really boring right now. What I find I'm interested in is talking about like those commandments to love. Jesus's commandment to love God with your heart and your strength and your mind, and the second commandment of loving your neighbor as yourself. And as one of my professors pointed out, Jesus even ups the ante on that and says, "Love your neighbor the way I've loved you." So even when I can't love myself, when I'm having days where I'm hurting or I feel dysphoric or I feel lost, I can love myself and others through that outside source. I can love myself through Jesus. I can love others through Jesus. Um, maybe, perhaps, our greatest theologian right now, Lizzo, is teaching us all a message when she says, you know, you might not be able to love yourself, but I love you. And if I can love you, then you should. should feel free to love yourself, or her Just Breathe tour. I mean, these are these are prophetic messages for a time that we live in.
Yeah, well, I definitely think we've got enough things that are very similar in our up our growing up times and in our being in the world, and definitely had all the same religion professors. And so I hope this will be an ongoing conversation. Those who haven't noticed yet, Jenny has begun blogging on transitional wisdom and wellness, which is very exciting. I'll put links down here if folk would
Awesome.
like
Yeah.
to be able to check that out. Are there ways that if people are interested in connecting with you or being in conversation with you, are the ways that you prefer?
Well, I am available on Twitter, which like everybody's on Twitter now. Um, my handle on there is Queering Caitlin, Caitlin, which is my middle name. So that's where that came from. You can feel free to message me on there if you want to talk. I also have my email address, which I think you have and could put in the links. You could send me a message. I'm not going to promise I'm going to respond immediately, just because with contextual formation and working in a church and taking classes and everything else going on, it may take a day or two, but I do promise to read what you have written me and to respond.
Well, thank you for joining me for this time and for this conversation, and all the blessings and internet glitter, because it doesn't get around your house,
Yes.
for everything that you will be enduring and learning and cultivating during your seminary time. I hope it brings peace for you, and that as you enter whatever journey is the what happens next after seminary, that it is life giving. And even if you have to go into moments of changing a church that's not quite ready for you, that even that makes God more palpable and visible in this world.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I I would like to close out. What I want to say more than anything else is to our queer community, and I've said it in other interviews that I've done with people. It's almost a mantra now, and maybe that's a good thing. But I just want everyone in our community to know that they're loved and they're supported, that we see them and we recognize their validity, even when you can't be boldly out, even when you can't step into your authenticity because of your situation or where you live or your family. We do see you and we do love you and we're here for you. So feel free to reach out to the people around you and just look for that support, because I know there are a lot of really, really good people out there who want to help.
Absolutely. And blessings on your probably upcoming bird funeral.
Ah, yes. Yeah, yeah, it's sitting outside the door right now, and we'll have to figure something out for it.
I didn't mean to make it weird at the end there, but life, death, it's all a part of the journey, right?
That's right. Yeah, it's a cycle.
All right.